Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone around the world. I'm Paul Sisler, and this is In the Moment. Hello, everyone. Sorry we're running a little bit late today. Sometimes life catches up to you, and you got to handle things first before we can come in and do this wonderful show. So, sorry if it caused any inconvenience. If you're not here live, I hope you catch the replay. Today, TPA Wolfric is going to join us, and he is going to talk about surrealism versus realism. Hello, TPA.
Hey! Hey, guys. So we're going to talk about surrealism versus realism. Reason why I want to talk about that, it actually was inspired by, not the entire topics that you and Luke were covering on your guys' show, but it made me think about fantasy, dark fantasy, non-fantasy, like different stories, different, worlds that often cover the human experience. And, whether or not it's surrealistic, whether it's metaphorical, whether it's non-metaphorical and more direct, whether it's cerebral, that sort of thing. And just the differences between the two. Reason why I also am looking at it is because with my current story, Shadow Thing, which I'm going to share a snippet actually during this podcast, if you're okay with that, is that my story tends to balance both. It tends to balance surrealistic, and it also tends to balance realistic when it comes to that, as well as tropes, things like the anti-hero, things like overcoming the monster, things like in a sense, not feminism, but the human experience in relation to, female versus male, gender, since we talked about gender before. Just like the overall balance between surrealistic and realistic fantasy and everything like that, because you've got movies like Dark Knight that do that, where they could easily have gone the Tim Burton route with creating an entire set, but instead what they did was it looked like they filmed in Chicago to create Gotham and to create the world of Batman. And with Superman, you've got that surrealistic quality to it because it's otherworldly. It's, dealing with a mythic god, as humans would see him, because he's an alien, but he has to pose and act and mask like he's a human being who works at as a journalist, and then goes and runs around the world trying to save people as Superman. And so you've got this balance of surrealistic qualities with realistic. And realistically speaking, people can look different with their glasses on or off. But we've always got that age-old, joke about whether or not, if you've got your glasses on or glasses off, if somebody can recognize you. And that was always something that was played with in the movies, was whether or not Superman, Clark Kent. And so, it's that whole surrealistic fantasy versus realistic fantasy. What are your thoughts on some of that, Paul?
Well, I kind of let me define what surrealism is. A 20th century avant-garde movement in art and literature which sought to release the creative potential of the unconscious mind. Basically, you're going into something that kind of like you gave the example, you take the glasses off, Clark Kent, Superman.
Yep.
You go into, when you look at surrealism versus realism, the realist claims that the truth of a theory is the reason of success. Okay. And the theory wouldn't be successful if it wasn't true.
Yep.
All right. The surrealist, on the other hand, claims the world is responsible for the success of the theory, and the theory would not be successful if the world behaved differently.
Yeah.
So when you start getting into art and literature, art is going to be more, for the surrealist, it's going to be more fantastic, outer space, things like this, um, dragons, fantasy, things that, catch the imagination, the creative unconscious of the writer. Whereas realism is more directed towards what is going on today or what has happened in the past. I'm sure people remember um, I can't remember the name of it, but you got the farmer and his wife and the pitchfork standing in the farmhouse. It's a famous painting. That is realistic because that described an era, a time, and how people basically were looked at. And, there you go. Whereas you take like a Monet with the um, um, stars and the surrealism of, the sky and how they're, drawn out, and the comet, the asteroid, comet, whatever, coming into the picture and all that. That's going to be more surrealistic and all that. And it's not that it can't happen, but it's like embellished,
Yeah.
So that embellishment is more of the surrealism than what is actual for realism. So both of the stories that I write, you have vampires and druids. Okay.
Yeah.
It's surrealism. There's nothing realistic about vampires and druids because they do not exist.
Yeah.
TJ, on the other hand, that can be argued either way because if you're someone that believes in angels and demons, then that could be a realism to you versus for me, it's surrealism.
Yeah. And I like how you put it that way because like when I say balance, you've got like realistic qualities to fiction, right? Like you've got like this person dies because the bullet hits them, or you've got this person can only lift so much because they're human versus, if they were vampire with supernatural strength, or if they were some other, type of creature or some sort of, species that has enhanced type of features. So you've got like this balance of both. I happen to love playing with super realism, like the idea that you are taking what we know to be real, and then you're adding dosages of fantasy to it and mythic qualities to it because it's imaginative. Because if you wanted to just live in the realistic, just do realism the whole time, you might as well just live in real life. Because in real life things tend to suck. In real life, you convince yourself that everything will get better, and it's all about mentality and attitude. Whereas in a story that's got surrealism to it, you could be like, oh yeah, let's pretend that this magical spell is making that broom lift, or let's pretend that the car can turn into or talking robot, aka transformer. And so you've got like all these different elements to it. So what are your thoughts on tropes and how they fit into both?
Well, before we go into the tropes and all that, I wanted to let everybody know it's Van Gogh. Starry Night was the painting that I was talking about before all those art people come after me like, you don't know what you're talking about. I was trying, I couldn't remember. Anyways, tropes. I'm just now familiarizing myself with these tropes. When Luke brought it up, and of course, I've had a few writing classes. I vaguely remember talking about tropes and hitting on different aspects of tropes. I just like to write, and my characters kind of fit into tropes. I use the tropes without knowing that I'm using this trope. Okay. I am doing more reading and research on tropes to get a better understanding and the importance of them because they're definitely important. The cliches, the different aspects of just like when Luke and I was talking, the The good guy wears white or the good guy wears black, the anti-hero, all these different aspects of what you have in your characters. I utilize these things, and I just didn't think about what they were called. I just simply, again, from having classes, learned how to utilize them and utilize them. I want my character to go in this direction. I want my character to be, this or this or this. And tropes are very important.
Oh
Combination
yeah.
tropes. You have to have, if you have just singular tropes, it's kind of like what Luke was talking about in like a romance novel. You know that the predictability. In other words, you have your two characters that are trying to fall in love, and at the end of the story they're going to fall in love because that's what the story is. You're just reading on how they're going to get there. That's boring to me. It's like I have romance in my stories and you don't know where it's going to go. Will they end up together? Won't they end up together? Does one of them die or do both of them die? Do I play off a Romeo and Juliet trope? There you go.
What if you're the narrator and you're an unreliable narrator, and because of the fact that you're playing with dimensions and you're playing with dreaming versus reality, and you're playing with the idea that everyone says that you're the bad guy in the story because of someone that was previously alive, and they claim that you're reborn as the same bad guy, and you start romancing somebody else who is also predetermined to be a bad guy, and you're in the point of view of a budding quote unquote maybe villain, and then maybe you're falling in love with that person, could lead to the death of many. And you're the narrator and you're the one narrating the character. So you're not Harry Potter, who's, quote unquote, the boy who lived, who's, by the end of the story, you're like, oh yeah, Hogwarts is saved, yay. What if he was the heir of Salazar Slytherin? And what if he fell in love with the Slytherin? And what if, he has to learn more about Voldemort and learn more about his quote unquote villain in order to protect those he loves, which causes him to have to practice dark magic. And in that process, he starts to fall in love with somebody who happens to have familial ties within the gang. Like that's where you could take these tropes and invert the expectation and make it to where you're playing with the ideas that have always been exchanged over the decades. You're like, what if I dialed it to 11 but then flipped the mirror? Like I broke the mirror, dented it, and then flipped it.
Right. Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
that's kind of how I've been approaching my story, by the way, is I'll be like, okay, so this is like every chapter is almost like a little story within the big story, right? Because you got the novel, which is the holistic viewpoint, but then you've got like the chapters that are like little pieces or snippets. And
Are you talking about the Snake and the Dame?
Yes. And each chapter is kind of like a story of its own. Yes. And like, so the idea that I'm playing with is, what if this hero finds out that his destiny or identity is not what it seems? And what if it's deadly and could lead to unraveling of his family?
Nice. Nice.
I've been playing with the so I originally published it back in July last year, and while I liked that story and it was fun, the problem was it was just fun. The problem is that it was just this average fantasy romp where he's being chased by this villain who's very inspired by Freddy, Krueger.
Right.
But I figured that I wasn't playing enough with not only the cartoonish aspects of Krueger, but also I wasn't playing enough with the Who Am I story. So what I did was I played around with it, I toyed with it, and then I found a completely different story in the mix, and I decided to magnify on that story because it inverted the trope of the identity and the legacy. Like, how you got your pull the sword out of the stone and now he becomes king, or you've got your finds a magic stone in the forest or grabs a staff and then now he can have the power to save the village. Well, what if that power was demented and twisted? And what if, his cousin who every time she tries to heal somebody, she's actually infecting herself. Like these are like things that you're playing with, tropes. You're playing with things, and you're adding a twist to it. And that's why I wanted to bring up surrealistic versus realistic, is because depending on how you spun the dial as to whether or not it's more realistic, which fits within our psyche or our perception of reality as to what's real or not, and whether or not it's uh, playing with insanity, whether it's playing with Alice in Wonderland like vibes, where like she falls down the rabbit hole and now suddenly all the flowers talk, and the mushrooms make you grow or shrink, and it's basically twisting your perception, and everything's not what it seems, and so. Um, that leads to being able to play with an unreliable narrator. Like, is this actually happening or is it not? Like, and is it happening the way we're believing it to happen, or did it just get inverted? And when they come out of it, are they the same or are they completely changed?
Right, right.
You remember how Joker? Joker's the character.
Mm-hmm.
You remember how he's an unreliable narrator, and he often lives multiple choice.
Right.
I like to play with that concept. It's like, what is his origin? Was his father abusive? Like, was he an alcoholic? Is his father the reason why he got those scars? Did he meet Harley Quinn before or after? And does he actually fight Batman, or is it all in his head? Like, it's unreliable. And so you play with enough narrators who are unreliable, but you have like a nice balance between reliable and unreliable, then you can really bend the reader's perceptions.
Oh, definitely, definitely, definitely.
I hope I'm not. I hope I'm not losing you here.
No. I actually about 3 days ago, I had this idea for a book, and I wrote it down. I did an outline, and basically the premise is I have this boy that goes into this library that was closed down for like decades, and um, it was kind of like a it's become like a drug haven. You know, people are shooting up in there, stuff like that, and he's running from these bullies, and he wanders into it, and he's kind of looking around because he thinks he's lost the bullies, and he's just now looking at all these books, and he comes across a book that just it catches his eye. He doesn't know why, but he's drawn to it, and it's a book of magic that had a spell on it that would be readable to whoever read it. So whatever their knowledge is, it's readable. So now you have some translation issues that are going to take place, and it opens up him to a realm of magic. And anything that he does, it doesn't work right. All right. Instead of wanting someone to like him, it makes them hate him. And then anyone else that speaks his name, they go around and start killing them and just different things. He causes complete chaos. And everything he tries to do to fix everything causes more chaos. So, and none of it works. Everything that he does, because of the translation, fails. Not that it fails in the performance of it, it fails in the carrying out of what was asked. It's always something different, where in trying to bring back a dead animal, he causes a bacterial infection that now starts to spread and creates an environmental disaster. Just everything that he does, no matter how pure of heart he is and wanting things to work out, everything always goes wrong.
That sounds very twisted and up my alley.
Ironic is what I'm calling it.
Ironic.
Ironic.
All right. Because it's ironic that he's trying to change things and trying to do things, and it just goes and backfires on him.
Yes. And he has power. He has a power to do everything right, just not the knowledge to do it.
Yes. He
And
lacks the know-how.
well, the reason why I bring this up is because the surrealism is the magic and everything that you do. The realism is if you weren't born with this in you and you innately already knew it and you came into possession of it, what might happen? You're not going to be able to cast these spells just and they work perfectly. You're going to make mistakes. No matter what your intent is, in real life, if you're given something, okay, you go into the hospital and, hey, T-Paul, we don't have a brain surgeon here today. We know that you're a smart guy. We need you to come in here and operate on this guy's brain.
Well, he's going to die.
And they pull you in there and they glove you up and they give you the scalpel and they're even instructing you what to do.
Okay.
Okay.
So I went from a 0% chance of survival to at least a 3.
Okay. So they're telling you to cut this and they're using the scientific name for it. And you're just like, what the hell is that? It's viscous tissue that blah, 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 blah. What do you mean viscous? You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to be able to do it right.
Nope.
Okay.
Chances are the guy's dead.
Right. Okay. This is how I'm bringing this out. It has the realism of what would happen if somebody actually got a hold of something like this. And the surrealism is that this doesn't exist.
Yeah, no, I dig it. I dig it a lot. It's reminding me of the story I was just talking about of Peter having to deal with identity, dealing with a dad who tells him to go to court, deal with a dad, or grandfather couple of grandfathers, and basically it's a family tale mixed with identity and finding out that a particular part of his past led to a lot of bloodshed. So, it's that realistic sense of family story, human story, even though he's a vampire, but still a human story, and yet adding all these mythical, surrealistic qualities to it to spice it up. And yet you've got, isolation, you've got less isolation, more uh, fighty stuff mixed with mythological stuff. But like, there's a lot going on, but I like how you talked about the brain and you talked about the process of the know-how. Because when Peter is given a sword, he isn't spending months upon months upon months learning how to use it, right? And it's a sentient sword. So I was playing around with that, by the way, in a couple of the scenes in the story. I was like, well, wait a minute. If this is a sentient sword and it talks and it like can eat and stuff, like how would you fight with that? And so I played with that and I was like, and I came up with this really interesting weird scene where the hero or the character anti-hero is trying to fight the villain and things go awry because of the fact that the sword itself has its own thoughts and feelings. Like, how like when you are watching a comic book movie or something and you're watching as Iron Man or some of the characters, or no, Thor has a hammer, so you're watching as Thor's using his hammer and stuff like that. And then like, what if Milnor decided out of nowhere, no, don't feel like it, and then runs away?
Yeah.
or decides to flirt with the other like another hammer or something. Like it's got that zany quality to it.
Isn't there an old cartoon or something with a talking sword?
Probably, and that might be part of where my brain got it from when I was a kid.
I'm trying to remember and all that. Let me. I want to Google this.
My brain is a cacophony of weird, like, influences and voices.
Oh, my brain is a talking sword. Hold on.
Wait, did you just like combine what I said with what you were saying and then do Google searching it?
Yeah. It did that. You started talking and all that. What
Oh, that's funny.
with a talking sword? There we go. Dave the Barbarian. That's not what I remember. The Sword of Billy. I don't remember that. Zach Storm. You're gonna have to watch Zach Storm now to see what goes on. Watch Sword Guy, the animation. I guess there's an anime with it. I'm thinking more when I was a kid. The Secret of the Sword, He-Man and She-Ra. Did He-Man have a talking sword?
I don't remember the sword ever talking. I do know in Motu they broke the sword in half though, and they were able to still use the sword.
Yeah. Anyways, I like the concept of a sword that thinks and talks and is sentient. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I played with the idea because I was like, because me and Amber were trying to figure out a way to spice up the sword concept, and then I was going to add like powers to it, but I didn't want it to become Soul Calibur because that's a game, and they already do sword stuff on there. I mean, they don't want it to be like every anime in existence. And she's like, "Well, what if it talked?" And I'm like, "Wait, what?" And she's like, "Yeah, what if it talked? It had its own thoughts and feelings, and it knows where it came from, and it just happens to think that our main character is an idiot." And especially since it's a very old sword or an ancient sword and has been through a long line of shadow fangs, been through a long line of people who've wielded it, and happens to think that our main hero is also a pussy because of the fact that he won't do certain things just yet that the sword likes, and the sword happens to like being bloodthirsty because he likes to eat blood and souls. And what if we had a very sassy sword who is kind of like the Eddie Brock Venom situation, where in the Venom movie, I don't know if you've seen it yet, but Eddie is about to jump out the Eddie's trying to escape, and he has to either jump out the window or take the elevator. And Venom's like, "Just jump out the window, Eddie. Just do it. Jump out the window. I'll take you. Come on, come on." And then he's like, "No, I can't. I can't do that. Like, I can't jump out the window. That's insane." And Venom's like, "Well, I'll just carry you. Come on, let's go." And he's like, "Eddie, Eddie, Eddie." And then he like takes the elevator, and the next scene you hear, "Pussy." And I was just dying. I was like, "Oh my god!" So I was like, "Ooh, what if I did that with like Fang? Like had it to where like he was such a Saskatoon, and like every time like Peter would do something that's more altruistic or more like light side leaning, like Fang is just like making sarcastic commentary the entire time, and only Peter can hear it." Unless you're in tune with it, unless you like his dad can hear it, or limited amount of characters can hear it. So in like scenes with like big casts and stuff, or with people that don't hear the sword, when Peter's responding to the sword, they think he's talking to himself, and so they're like, "Are you okay, man?" And he's just like, "Fake, shut up! You're making me look insane." And Fake's just like, "I'm hungry. Feed me." and he's having this big back and forth talk, and it'd be kind of like if you're talking to your cat, except you can actually understand what your cat is saying, or you can understand what your dog is saying. And so, but it's a sword, and it's a sword that can float and move around. And so, like, say like Peter's in a battle or something, and he's just like. And Fang blocks a shot, and Peter's like looks back and sees that Fang saved his life, and Fang is just like, "I'm gonna hold this over you, because don't feed. You better feed me next time because you owe me." And like it's like this very symbiotic relationship that has like pushbacks and stuff like that. And he's not just like, "Oh, I'm doting after you because you're a hero, and I'm gonna tend to your every need." Instead, he's gonna be like, "You idiot."
It almost has like a Death Note sound to it.
Yeah, that kind of. Yeah, like he's a Shinigami, and Light is the idiot kid who's learning about the fact that he can kill people with his notebook, and Shinigami's just like, "Come on, just feed me an apple, like right now. Come on, you owe me." "Wait, why? I bailed you out back there, you idiot."
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, that's the surrealistic, by the way. Surrealistic versus realistic.
Right.
No,
Right. And again, the world has to support what you've created, you know.
Yep.
So yeah. Now
Yeah, no, and what's funny is I already know the entire backstory of the sword, by the way. I know where it comes from, I know how it was forged, I know what made it sentient. I have it all like pre-built. Like there was one night where I was like, I really gotta figure this stuff out so that if someone tries to like throw a curveball at me and ask me where it came from, like
mhm,
when I'm at a signing or when I'm and hopefully when they know where the story is, so it's not a spoiler, like I'll be
right.
like, oh yeah, by the way, side note, this happened. And then they're like, "Oh my God, you know everything about the sword." It's like, I hope so. I created the damn thing.
Yep. Yep. Now we talked about the snake and the dame.
Okay.
You also have. Let me
Storms
bring.
of Blood.
Yes. There we go. Storms
That
of
one has
Blood.
never been released ever. Like any person who's ever bought any of these particular stories, Storms of Blood will be utterly fresh.
Now both of these are on Amazon. You can get them both on Amazon, right?
Yep, they're pre-order right now.
Okay.
The first one drops March. I was gonna drop at the end of this month, but because of real life and editing, I'm like 2 weeks pushback. So it's pushed back from February 28th to March 21st. So you got some time, got a window. And then this one, Storms of Blood, drops in April. So
I really love this cover art. I really do. This is just absolutely gorgeous.
thank you. Yeah, yeah. Compliments of Gustelle. She's a freaking genius.
Yes. I mean, I love like the face pressed up against the other face. It just, it's like Storms of Blood uncover secrets that dwell within the heart, and it's just like, which one is the real human and which one is the secret?
Exactly. And that's the question that has to be answered by the end of the story. Like it has like there's so much that is happening in that story. Like well, Peter's maybe about identity. Trinity's is like the next stage of that identity, but from her point of view. So it's not the story happening again because that would be just redundant. And I could do those stories, but right now the the ending of Storms of Blood will coincide with the beginning of the third book. So when the third act is happening in Storms of Blood, it'll happen simultaneously with the third book. So that's the one time where I'm doing overlap, where something's happening at the same time. And that's where I ended up splitting up a couple of the narrators. But overall, the story is going to take place after Snake and the Dame, but it's going to be from Trinity's point of view. So you're still going to get Peter's story. You're still going to get Orion's. You're still going to get a few of the other characters from the Snake and the Dame. It'll just be from Trinity's point of view. And it's going to be her version of the story in her point of view and her version of the same thing Peter's facing, which is the question of who am I? And hers is a bit more sinister because hers is to do with the ghost of Trinitas, which is why that mirrored image exists, by the way. It's that whole the whole yin and yang, the coin flip of, do I become evil or is evil even a concept? Is evil manufactured by creation? Like, do we determine that or can we choose for ourselves who we're going to become? That's kind of the question that gets asked by this story, and that's what has to get answered, which is why I told you that that cover plays perfectly into that concept. And
Yeah.
I enjoyed the shit out of writing this novel, and part of that was because you know how I made that Alice in Wonderland example? A bit of that plays into the story.
Okay.
So it is it's playing off of the unreliable narrator. It's playing off of the fact that Trinity is both reliable and unreliable at the same time. And it's playing off of the monster on the end of the, at the other end of the doorway, where you open the door and then the monster's on the other side. It's playing off of a bunch. Basically, Storms of Blood is like a love letter to horror movies because every single one of the chapters has a piece of horror in it. Like whether or not it's body horror, whether it's, slasher horror, whether it's, legacy horror with like a ghost from another family's existence coming to haunt. It's different parts of well, horror movies and horror concepts from my childhood from the 80s and 90s. I was born in 91, but 80s is still very prevalent because that was a big defining decade for horror. This is a story that's kind of like, it's also horror romance, by the way. I'm playing with horror and horror romance. So not only is it's a two-sided coin. It not only is a horror story that plays off of horror movies, but it's also horror romance because there's a romance going on in the undercurrent. And I actually made a couple different jokes at the beginning of this podcast episode that play into that. If anyone's paying attention at all to the podcast, you may catch some things that I said.
I got a couple people that here in March, I'm going to be bringing one or two onto your show, one or two onto Luke's show. I got
all right.
some writers and some authors that I'm going to be bringing in. And I also want to do a show where when we're talking about this, I don't know how familiar you are with psychological, sociological philosophy on free will versus determinism. But I'd like to bring that into play into how we as writers write.
That would be perfect, especially since that plays into the story too.
Yeah, because I mean, I kind of wonder where if people go to where their characters have free will, or if they're going to their environment is what's determined who they are and what they do. And of course, the argument between free will and determinism is that everything is already decided. We actually make no choices in our life because it's all a chemical reaction to our environment. So we're not responsible for anything we do because whatever we do is based upon what we see, hear, and feel throughout the whole world. Whereas free will means that you actually, make all of your own decisions, and determinism has nothing to do with it. Where obviously both play a part in real life, So I kind of want to bring that in on a future discussion and all that when in writing here, So I think that would be very interesting as a concept.
That would be fascinating as fuck, dude. Like I whenever I was writing, and I'm going to be editing Storms of Blood here soon. I've just been pounding away at editing Snake in the Name first because I wanted to get a concrete cementing of how that story functions, so that I can then apply it to Storms of Blood. Because something we've talked about on this podcast before is not editing yourself into a corner. And so I didn't want to edit myself into a corner and then have to rewrite everything I just edited in that story. So I waited till after the one story was done before I would tackle this one. And so while the story is written for Trinity, I then have to go in there and be like, okay, now that I've got the story written, what is the third story that's in here? What is the final draft? Where are we going from here? What is going to pop up while I'm editing it? And because a lot of stories do that. And the psychological aspects you're talking about and the psychological influences are very prevalent in the story. It's very much, you remember how we talked about before about how I tend to write characters as humans or as as beings. Gender takes some influence, but not a lot, and gender roles don't really take a part per se, because depending on what your character is as to how you write them. With Trinity, she's less of the fighty, and it's more of mental psychological warfare for her. It's more emotional warfare. It's more if she ends up in a battle sequence, it's how is she feeling? It's what is she thinking? How is she perceiving this? How is she actually handling it as a woman and as a teenage girl? Not as I am a person that has muscles because I'm a vampire, but I happen to be female, so boom, boom, bang, bang, I'm going to punch the dude. No, instead it's how does she handling this as a person because of the fact that she's got a psychological war going on in her head because she's got people telling her who she's going to be, and she's trying to figure that out on who she actually is. And so you've got a bit of that psychological touch to it. So I loved how you commented on the cover because the Because when I stared at that cover, by the way, for like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, just staring at it. And the wife was like, "So do you like it?" Like, like an hour later. And I was just like, I opened it back up because I got distracted by something else. And she's like, "So do you like it?" And I'm just like, I'm drooling right now. And it's not because she's a teenage girl. I'm like drooling because it's a cover. Like, the book cover is beautiful. Like,
It
it's a
is.
cover that it really, really embodies the essence of the story.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because, and at first I was just going to call it Storm of Blood, right? I was going to call it Storm of Blood because I was like, well, there's obviously a mental storm going on, and obviously there's blood involved, so let's just call it Storm of Blood. And then the wife's like, well, I mean, there's storms, yes. And I'm like, wait, holy shit. She's like, what? And I'm like, you just made it plural. And she's like, yeah, but isn't it Storm of Blood? And I'm like, not anymore. So I put an S at the end of storms because I was like, there's multiple things going on in the story, and it needs an S, much like Superman needs an S. And so it's got that plural thing going on, but I love that cover. It's probably one of my favorites out of the 5 that we've got created for this volume. The 4th I haven't revealed yet at all to anybody, like outside of, like, I've shown my Twitter buddy or my Discord buddy the 4th cover, which he's like, if you don't use that cover, I'm gonna slap you. But yeah, no, we've been playing around with different concepts and ideas. Like, literally, Storms of Blood cover is like the 6th or 7th cover we've come up with for that story, and it's
Mm-hmm.
because of the fact that we play around with different concepts and we play around with different ideas before we finally figure out the one that actually rings true. And so that one is not a rough draft. That's me being like, so can we tackle it again? And she's like, but I've already done it like twice. And I'm like, we do it again? And she's like, here. And so she went ahead and did a thing. And then she's like, what do you think of that? And I'm like, oh my fucking God, that's good.
Well, the Snake in the Dame, I like the coloration of it.
Yes.
The colors draw you in. I mean, if I was walking in a bookstore and I saw that coloration, I would walk up and pick it up. I would
Awesome.
be the colors. And the second one, and seeing that again, if I was walking through a bookstore, that would catch my attention. I would walk up and pick that up and look at it. Storms of Blood, I'm now going to look at the back and see what it says it's about. And again, I haven't seen what's written on the back, but there's a good chance that'd be a book that I'd pick up because it looks good. I like it.
Oh yeah, no, the second book on the back of the book, it, like, the vibe of it, and I'll just tell you this because of the fact that I know what it looks like already. I even wrote the synopsis and stuff, and I have scrapped the synopsis like 8 times and then rewrote it again. But the back of it makes me think of the old myth books, like the old myth adventures. Like the design itself, it looks like they're going on a quest, or looks like they're going on a giant journey, and it is a great mirrored image to the front. So you're gonna love the back of it. Same with the first one. The first one, let's just say Scales has to do with the back. Scales and ghostly stuff. So you get that image in your head. But yeah, no, I appreciate that. Do you want me to read a part of Snake?
Yes, please do. Please do.
Okay. I just figured I'd bring it up since we're at like 40 minutes in.
Before you do, remember we did that interview with Jay a few weeks back?
Yeah.
Within a few days, I called Jay. The Liars of Tar ends everything. The dog breaks the leash, and the Duchess bathes in blood.
That's the inscription?
The ciphers, I figured them out.
Oh shit. That is metal as fuck. Wow. I am beyond impressed.
Jay said I could say it. Jay said I could say it. So
they did indeed. They did indeed.
Yep.
Wow. No, I'm very impressed by that. That's awesome. That's amazing.
Yes. It only took me a few hours.
Only for a few hours.
Yep.
Not a big deal. Just a few hours.
I'm good at those things. Anyways, now what are you reading from again? Snake in the Dame?
Yeah, I'm reading the prologue.
Okay.
I'm pulling up the prologue right now so I can read it to you. Or them people who are listening. Just waiting for the thing to cooperate. Come on, docs. There you are. And like because I was scrolling and stuff, it like zip lined down to past the chapter, and I'm like, no. Yeah, the problem is the kids have been using this damn tablet for like weeks now. They've been like, it's been getting nonstop usage hour after hour after hour from each kid. And so it's probably going, come on, give me a break. All right, so here we are. Prologue. Lionel, Lady and the Shadows. February 2000, 2 months ago. Every step down the hallway echoed in his ears as he walked, dancing in syncopated rhythm, with the static of voices screaming in his head. He could hear the accusing stares, dripping with blood as the penetrating venom filtered through his mind. The voices screaming in varying intensity. Court was not good today, as Lionel Knight felt himself begin to get lost inside the chasm of his own insanity. He saw his reflection looming, his blood-stained cloak drifting around his body, his dirty blonde hair deceiving in his head, the scars on his face glinting in the low overhead orange and yellow light. His fingers flexed open and closed as his feet continued to move towards the door ahead of him, the mirror anchored to the side of the door in the hall he crossed. The woman in court today reminded him of his mother, who'd tried to kill him years prior. One of the ladies who worked with Alexander Kapelovskaya, her distorted face and snide, stabbing voice echoing in broken replay in his mind's eye. His Nexus screen displayed no signal on the device in his hand. Of course, with the brick and lead-laced walls, either signal dies or is non-existent. Lionel suspected that wasn't an accident. He opened the door, heavier in design than it looked. It had a brass-like surface behind the mirror. Something told him that Kresh didn't just like staring at himself before going into his lab. Mirrors often acted as doorways in this world, Lionel recalled, and he knew of mirrors at the school he worked at when he wasn't acting as Leon's hand of the king. One would argue his most preferable job being teaching, which at first he wasn't the best at. He'd nearly quit pretty early on initially, before both Harness and Drakena had convinced him to stay. Something about helping young minds grow gave him solace and reprieve from his own suffering and broken soul. I see you are still inside your own mind, Lionel Knight. I take it court wasn't relaxing, Kresh said in a low tone of voice as Lionel entered the room. His best friend's twin brother had looked up from something he was writing down. Wulfric, king of Rakia, wore the emblem family crest with two direwolves and swords in the middle, colored in red and black, with green on the eyes. Insufferable madness at its finest, your grace, Lionel said in a flat tone. He measured Kresh carefully, the mad scientist and a king of Rakia. The man always verged between calculative and insane. It was like they were not sure which side to push and influence with them, ever so tempted by power. Just remember, Lionel, suffering is a choice. Pain is mandatory, Kresh replied. That's why I work to heal others. Pain is a part of healing, and they all will learn soon enough. And this is a choice? Lionel gestured at the bodies on the bed. Kresh cast a glance towards the beds, and an ominous grin spread on his face, and then it flickered to a mask of concern. There were 6 beds against the wall. 5 were currently occupied that Lionel could see in the dim lighting. A low overhead light swinging lightly above. Kresh's desk was far off to the right, and on the other side, various tables where vials bubbled. He had a cart nearby where he took volunteers who donated blood to blood banks and conducted experiments. People desperate for cures of illness of various different kinds looking to make extra money. He would pay them to be tested on. Voluntary lab rats in a chasm of building madness. Kresh had argued the ethics with the council extensively. The laboratory where Kresh conducted his experiments was identical in both kingdoms, Atrales and Rakia. Both brothers practiced science. It was how Kresh and Murdrin, a drug lord, had met in school many, many years ago. This is essential for our world, for the many others out there. Don't forget, we aren't just testing a cure for mankind's ailments, it's for all of creation to heal a galaxy. Crash said in a manic tone of voice just above a whisper. What did the ATACs have to say about this? They would not have liked the idea of Terra Far adopting what could be used as a weapon. Ronald stared at Crash, and his eyes glimmer red. What they don't know won't hurt them, and it won't hurt the galactic verse either. The race is much like the humans on this planet. As long as we placate them and assure security, it will work out, Crash replied cryptically. Lionel clicked his jaw, trying to figure out what Crash's exact play was here. Dad, I've got the formula redone as requested. Are you sure this is safe? Are they going to be okay? Young man, about 16, the same age as Lionel's godsons, asked as he entered the room. He had low-cut brown hair and a strong face and jawline, with beady golden eyes that flashed varying degrees of silver as he talked. Caden, it is exactly as I explained to you and your mother earlier, Krish reassured his son. I'm warning you now, Wolfric, Lionel growled, gritting his teeth. You think I would genuinely hurt my nephew? Not intentionally. Science requires sacrifice, especially if it means saving millions of lives. And this serum, it's a cure for what is to come. Crash said, his eyes getting more level. Then a sad look passed over his eyes. You don't know what I've seen yet, Mr. Lionel Knight. Hand of the King and the Shadow of Knights. Lionel was taken aback by the sudden shadow of fear and anger take place, flashing and arcing around his face, his jaw tightening, his eyes going gold in one eye and then red in the other. A war is coming, a giant one, bigger than any we've faced before. You served with me during the Second Great War, a brotherhood of arms. You know what I'm talking about. Crash brushed Lionel's shoulder, and Lionel grimaced. A bloodbath, a cacophony of screams, and many bodies torn apart. Torso, limbs, parts of heads. It was one of the worst battles Lionel has seen, bore witness to the Crusades of Skya. It was witch versus witch, protecting the Fae, whose goddess helped give them their power. A lot of people, men, women, living beings were lost. Lionel felt himself begin to feel his mind spin. His stomach felt like a battlefield of anger, rage, and extreme anxiety. Do you remember what happened on one of those nights? The time that Leon, you, and others had begun to get possessed? This is a stepping stone. It is a cure for that. Krish's eyes were intense, boring holes into the air between the both of them, a piercing stare. Lionel began taking a breath, and then he felt radiating heat in his eyes. Okay, yes, we're in blood. Dead bodies run amok. Bad things, because the last batch did not end well. I had to cart those bodies off myself because Thorn was busy helping Ayla. I don't want to do that again. It's hard enough acting as king in your stead, Caden replied. He looked exhausted the more Lionel studied him. About the same height as Peter and Chris, just above average. Almost 5'8", not as tall as his father. Lionel suspected that he'd meet or surpass his father's height at some point. I put you in that position, my son, so that you can learn the basics and gravity of power. A tug of war of ethics and power and how you wield it will create the man you will eventually become, Caden. Krish replied. I just want my father back, Caden said, and Lionel was deftly reminded of Peter. Perhaps Krish could take a break from science and royalty and have an evening with you soon, boy. Lionel said, his voice gentler than before. As if all the science, power, and Caden broke off and his features darkened. His outfit looked extra worn, and Lionel noted the crown was missing from his head. All in due time, my son. Some of the greatest men in our time and before our time changed the world with science and power. It's a measure of how society runs, the strength of our motivations. We'll go far more the more we're willing to push to take it further, Krish said with a manic glint in his eyes. His mouth was almost feral as he pressed a button on a remote, and a machine began injecting the bodies one by one. They began to writhe. Sometimes you have to take a break from conquest and remember what's most important, where home is, Lionel grunted. Spoken like a true head of the king, Krish spoke with a deep, majestic whisper. Spoken like a father, Lionel said under his breath. Caden put a hand on Lionel's shoulder, and in the dim lighting he could see Caden's eyes beginning to glisten. One of the bodies pulled off the blanket, and Peter's face and disheveled hair was revealed. He uttered a guttural growl, gnashing teeth, and scooped the air. Peter! Lionel growled. He moved towards the boy. He felt utter confliction, anxiety, fighting like knives, a building rage that nearly made himself go monstrous. He made a move to stop Peter from hurting himself. Do not interrupt this, Lionel Knight. It is proceeding as it was meant to. His father agreed to this. Lionel heard an urgent, cutting but reassuring woman's voice in his mind. Trinitas! Lionel spoke out loud, tilted his head. He fought her during the fall of the Braxton. It was a very vague part of history because Dante cast non-stop spells at the urging of the Celestials of the High Throne. He remembers her power and the force she carried for being a very powerful witch. She could bend dimensions, stop time itself, even bend the rules of the living. Desriel got nervous of her power and ordered Lionel to depower her or otherwise kill her. She proved to be a supernova of power and parried effortlessly. Yes, a ghost of the past. An urgency of the most importance. If you stop this, the boy dies. If you prevent this, the whole world crumbles. Lionel growled. He could feel his face tightening in rage, his fingers flexing. All it would take is a quick movement, and the boy would snap out of it. Lionel, don't try to stop it. The formula is already unstable, Caden said in a whisper. Don't risk my cousin's life. A side effect of the dosage. They have to go through a process for it to work. Seizures and animalistic tendencies. Just then, a man in a trench cloak with a cybernetic eye stepped forward, a flash of bright, silvery white light just behind him. A shadow of wings against the wall behind him as Lionel glanced his direction. The shadowy forms were waving as if billowing in a gust of sudden wind. Lionel felt his hair ripple from the force. Dante, Lionel growled. Mr. Knight, a pleasure. Let us help the young prince cope with the side effects, shall we? Dante greeted him. Why don't we all do it? Caden himself has celestial blood. Christian's voice was smooth, with a gruff edge. Sure, but it needs an angel's pure grace, an archangel, and I happen to be one. Join me, my brothers, in the spare the boy utter insanity. I will start with him and move my way through all of them. Provide the assist, fellow Nephilim children. Dante's voice was gruff, but with a dancing lilt as he talked. Lionel hovered his hands over each body in turn, and slowly all of them started to calm down. He concentrated with his mind while thinking of a positive memory, one where the brotherhood gathered as a family and reminded him of what he lost. His pure-blood mother rejected him, a pure fae, and his father, a vampire, suspected Lionel's father was celestial, kept him alive growing up. The brotherhood took him in and provided the support he never had. They've hunted dark creatures, beings that turned out to be connected to his mother, who likely ran a drug cartel gang. With the combined efforts of all of them, they began settling. Lionel was haunted by the mere idea that one day they'd all slowly find out, every one of these poor teenagers, that they were part of a conquest of insanity and healing and power. His nexus rang after he'd left that level and began making his way out via a secret passageway, one Crash had shown them long ago. Dad, Mom says to remember the beef for dinner. Don't forget biscuits for Bella. She's been extra whiny. Pandora's voice crackled in as the line kicked in. Yes, child. You know I was headed to the joint. I have to speak with Grace anyway. Lana grunted in response. A grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. How did the meeting go? She asked. Her voice dipped into a deadpan of sarcasm. It went. Crushed his insanity, his experiments, Lionel replied. You better be staying careful, Dad. We're tired of having to clean you up. Well, anyway, Pandora said. Oh, Mom says she needs to talk to you when she gets back. Love you, Dad. The line clicked as she hung up. Love you too, child. Lionel said out loud to himself as he began to focus on the image of the joint. He began the journey away from this current madness on the way home. That's the end of that prologue.
Nice. It's kind of cool because towards the end and all that, the light in the upper corner would like fluctuate and get bright, like, ooh.
Nice.
Yeah,
guys, that is the prologue for Snake in the Dame, which is on pre-order right now. I was gonna read out the first chapter as well, but I'm like, I don't want it to be too long. And we've spent like 40 minutes talking about all this stuff, and you guys keep hearing me talk about, my thoughts on this thing and that thing. So I wanted to not only, of course, to promote the book, but also to like kind of demonstrate some of the stuff I've always been talking about and some of the stuff that we've been talking about together. So, and you've read out some of your stuff before, and so I was like, let me actually try that one this time and read out something and show some of the stuff I've been editing.
Oh, never a problem. Never a problem. You can always read out your stuff. Guests can always read out their stuff. If an author wants to come on and wants to do like a half-hour reading from a book that they have, I'm more than happy to oblige. Definitely. So I love people that will share their stuff. It piques interest. It lets people know, hey, we are writers. And just to let everybody know, pre-order is available on Amazon right now for The Snake and the Dame and Storms of Blood, correct?
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Okay. And it's officially going to be released on what day?
March 21st for Snake and the Dame, and April, I think it's 15th or 18th for Storms of Blood.
Okay.
That ballpark range.
There we go. Congratulations again on the publication. We all
Thank
know
you.
how hard it is to get a book published. Yes. So congrats.
Absolutely.
All right. And who's the publishing company?
Technically my studio.
All right. So your T-Paw's Playhouse is now publishing.
Yeah, Hellhound Studios Productions.
Nice. All right. Sounds good. Excellent show. Again, everyone. Any closing thoughts, T-Paw?
Just, take any knowledge that we've been giving you. Hopefully you learned something today. Hopefully we've been teaching you stuff every time we come here and talk and stuff and discuss writing. Go off and make a thing and do great things, and enjoy yourselves, and have a week.
All right. Sounds good. All right, everybody. Tomorrow I have Comedy and Controversy with Jeremy Baker. We're going to be talking about some political issues, so it can get a little stormy. And then on Sunday, we have Elizabeth Masters with Becoming Stoic, and we're going to get into the first meditation of Rene Descartes. So
Nice. I'll be there for it.
Yes. All right, everyone. Remember, be kind, be happy, and may good things come your way. Thank you.